Hey, so in this video, I'm going to show you an AI automation that you can build that scrapes any website and summarizes it with AI using n8n. So if you're new to n8n, it's definitely a good idea to understand how to go out, scrape a website, have AI summarize it, and then maybe write it to a Google Sheet. So let me just demo what we're doing here. So I have the URL here of a newsletter page of one of the creators that I follow, one of my favorite creators, Justin Welsh. All right, so this is a list, or it's a website that includes links to all of his newsletters. Okay, so let's say I wanted to go out, I wanted to scrape these newsletters, I wanted AI to summarize them and then write it to a Google Sheet. So that's what this n8n flow is doing. But all I'm going to do is hit test workflow, and what it's going to do is it's going to go out and scrape the newsletter, scrape his website, scrape all of the content, right? Then it's going to send that content to AI, which you can see it's doing right over here. And so what this AI step is doing is it's taking all of that scraped text and it's going to put it in a nice summary for me. And then finally, we're going to merge and clean up the text a little bit and then write it to a Google Sheet. So when I come into my spreadsheet here, what I have is a title of the newsletter and then an AI summary, right? So this article discusses the potential shift away from traditional social media platforms. But you can see how quickly this automation was able to go out, scrape, summarize, and write to Google Sheets. So you can use this for any use case where you want to go out and scrape something online and then have AI summarize that content and then write it to some kind of database. By the way, if you want access to this template, be sure to check out my school community, AI Automation Made Easy. We discuss all things AI agents and AI automation and how you can use them in your own business to grow your company, and also how you can use them to sell them as a service, as a consultant, or an agency. So be sure to check the link below the YouTube video. So let's walk through the game plan and then we'll set it up step by step in n8n. So we're going to trigger this workflow just by hitting the test workflow, although you could schedule this to run once a week or once a day or whatever the cadence you want. Then we're going to get into this part of the flow, which is going to involve scraping the actual newsletter. All right. So this is the page on Justin's website that includes the links to all of his newsletters. So what we're going to do is we're going to fetch the list of the newsletters. We're going to extract the HTML content of that page. Then we're going to split that into individual items so we can process them one by one. Then, I don't want to process all of these in this video, so I'm going to set a hard limit here to limit the first 5 newsletter episodes, and then we're going to scrape that content. Now, once we have the scraped newsletter content, what we're going to do is move over to this section of our automation, which is going to summarize them with AI. So we're actually going to first kind of go above here and extract the title, because we're going to use that to write it to Google Sheet. But in the summarize section here, we're going to extract only the text of the newsletter, meaning all of the other noisy HTML content. We don't necessarily want that in our output. Then we're going to send that text to our AI step here, and we're going to use this summarization chain with the data loader and the character splitter, along with the OpenAI chat model, to summarize all of this content with AI, right? So that's this column you see over here. And then in order to write that to Google Sheets, we're going to merge the title with the AI summary. We're going to do a little cleanup, and then finally we're going to write that to Google Sheets so we can have kind of a running database of his newsletters. All right, so inside of your n8n dashboard, let's just do create new workflow here, and then we'll add a first step. So let's just trigger this manually. And now the first node that we're going to want to get here is an HTTP request node. So let me drag that onto the canvas. And what we're going to want to do is get, so leave the method to get, because we're going to fetch or pull in. What we want is this page here. Again, this is the page that's going to contain links to these newsletters, right? The individual newsletters. So it's kind of like the landing page here. So I'm going to grab this URL and paste it into the URL field over here. Now, we don't need any other settings for this step, but we can test it by clicking test step. And now what we can see in the output here in the JSON, it's definitely a jumbled mess, but this is the HTML formatting that you can see here of this page. Okay, so let's try to search for practical tips, and let's see if that comes up. So when I search for practical tips, I can see that's wrapped in a header 1 over here. So what this is doing is displaying this page in raw HTML format, right? So if I were to go into Chrome and right click and hit inspect like I've done here, what we can see is the HTML format over here inside of Chrome, but this is how it's displaying in n8n, and it's doing it correctly, so we know that this step is good to go. All right, the next thing we want to do is extract some of that HTML content, okay? Because we're going to need to use that to feed it into the rest of our automation. So I'm going to search for HTML, work with HTML, and then here we want to extract HTML content. All right, so what we're trying to do here first is extract the URLs, right? The individual newsletter URLs. Because right now, again, this is just a landing page, but all of the content is in these individual posts, right? So if I were to click into one of these, this is where the content lives. And so what I really need to grab is this, right? This part, or maybe including the newsletter as well, right? I want to extract these URLs from this page, so then again, we can feed it into the rest of our automation. So I'm going to leave extract HTML content. I'm going to leave the source data as JSON, the JSON property as data. And then for the key, what I'm going to grab over here, so this is what I'm going to name what we're extracting here, right? So I want to extract the edition URL, right? The newsletter edition. And so for the CSS selector, what I'm going to grab over here on my clipboard is this, and I'll show you this in a second, right? So it's TSS issues item wrap. And so let me click into an example here, right? So if I search for this part of the URL in the HTTP request, right, I can see it's over here, right? So this HTTP output from the previous node contains the URL here. And it's this newsletter / the great social media exodus. This is the data that I want to pass into a future node. And you can see that it's wrapped in this TSS issues item area over here. So what I did is I fed this into ChatGPT, and I basically said, hey, this is what I'm trying to extract. It's wrapped around this code. Can you help me out with the CSS selector? And it told me exactly what CSS selector to use. So listen, sometimes n8n can be a little intimidating if you are a no coder, and I do not have a coding background. And just a heads up, when you come into situations like this where you're not sure what to choose here, don't be afraid to send a screenshot of this to ChatGPT and say, hey, can you help me out? And with a little back and forth, it will be able to help you figure it out. But anyway, for the return value, what we want to do, and ChatGPT help with this one as well, is return an attribute, okay? And then what we want here for this attribute is this right here, this href, right, which is going to include the slug of the URL. So that's the attribute that we want. And then the last setting we need to do is we want to turn on this array. So we're going to be getting back multiple newsletter URLs, and we want to be processing them separately, not as just a single string or a single piece of text. So we want to process this one by one, so that when we write them to our Google Sheet, they're coming in line by line instead of all in one bunch. So make sure to turn on return array, and let's see if we can test out this step and see what happens. All right, so perfect, right? This is exactly what we want. So you can see in the output section over here, it's returning what we're naming the edition URL. And because we turned on the array, it's going to output these one line at a time. And these are the actual newsletter slugs, or the end of the URLs, right? So if I look at this one, it's newsletter, the great social media exodus, which matches up over here. Now, if I go back to his site and click on the next one, we can see that this slug is newsletter, luck is mostly just math, And then if I go back into n8n, that's exactly what we're getting over here, right? So now we have these URLs which we're going to be able to use in the succeeding steps so we can scrape these individually. All right, next what we're going to want to do, so even though these URLs are on separate lines, which is great, you can see in the output that n8n is still treating this as just one item. So what I want to do next is split these out into 10 separate items. So in order to do that, I'm going to come over to my node library here, and I'm going to search for split. Okay, so this is going to split out these 10 items, okay, into individual ones. So the field that I want to split out on is this addition URL field. And so I'm going to go change the view here to schema, and I can see I can grab this addition URL field and just drag it in over here. And to include, I don't need any other fields, but what I can do next is test this step, and let's see. So you can see over here before when we're looking in the JSON view, this is one, even though it's 10 lines, which is great, it's still one item. But now in the output, since we split these out, and now we can truly use these as individual URLs, we have 10 items. All right, next I want to show you a neat little feature in n8n that allows you to limit the amount of text or items rather that you want to process, right? So right now we have 10 items, and maybe we want to process all 10, or maybe we don't. So to show you this cool feature, let's pretend we only want this automation to process 5 of these items, okay? So what we can do is come back to our canvas here, click the plus button, and I'm going to search for limit. So this is going to restrict the number of items. So let me drag that onto the canvas here, and all we need to do is tell n8n how many items we want to limit it on. So I'm going to type in 5, and then for keep, I'm going to leave that as first items. Now let's see what happens if we test this step, right? So you can see we started with 10 items, and now for the output, it's restricted it, or it's limited it to just 5 items, right? The first 5 in the list. All right, so now what we want to do is scrape the individual newsletter URLs, right? So remember, at the beginning, what we scraped was that landing page that had all of them on this one page. But now that we want to scrape and get into the individual newsletters, we're going to do something very similar. So we need another HTTP request here. So let me search for HTTP request. And this is also going to be a get method. But for the URL, what we're going to want to do here is use an expression. And let me go to the schema here. So what we want to grab are the individual URL slugs, which, again, in the schema view is this addition URL, right? This newsletter / the great social media exodus. But we need to basically append the beginning part of that URL here and then combine it with the addition URL. So what I mean by that is, again, when we go onto the actual website, what I need to do is grab all of the text in the URL that comes before this / newsletter, right? Because the / newsletter, we're going to bring in here as a variable. So let me show you how to do this. So make sure for URL that you're under expression. So what I'm going to do first is bring in the beginning part of the URL, which is really just the full domain name. With that, I actually don't want that / because the / is going to come from the addition URL. All right, now what I want to do is append this variable, which is the actual end of the slug. So I'm going to drag this addition URL just right in here after the domain, and now you can see what the result is going to look like, right? It's going to be the justinwelsh.me domain. Now appended after that is going to be this newsletter slug. And if I wanted to, let's see if we can test this step. And this may take a second, because what it's going to do is, again, it's scraping the entire 1,500 word newsletter. And while that's working, let's, I haven't been doing this, but let's rename this while it finishes scraping. So this is scrape newsletter content. So now we know what this node actually does. And what we can see here on the right-hand side, again, is our output in HTML. So it's very similar to what we were doing earlier, but instead of the landing page, this is the actual newsletter, right? So it's got the publish date, and this is the actual content, right? The content of the page in HTML. So now we can kind of manipulate this text and send it off to AI. All right, so we're looking good, and really this part of the automation is pretty much done. All right, so we've got the scraping newsletter part of this done, and now we can move on to where we're gonna summarize this content. So again, we're scraping these posts, so we have the HTML output, so we're gonna need to clean that up before sending it off to AI. So let's do that. All right, so let's add another HTML node here, another extract HTML node. And what we want is for this part, and let's rename this, we're going to want to extract the title because we're going to need two different pieces of information for our output. Remember, if you looked at our final Google Sheet here, we've got a column for the title and then a column for the AI summary. So we need to output just the title itself. So back inside the node, we're going to leave the operation, the source data, and the JSON property as is. Now to name our key, I'm just going to call this title. And now for the CSS selector, with the title, it's much easier than it was before. We just need to actually put title, and then we're going to keep the return value as text, and then we're going to leave this skip selectors alone because we're only trying to grab the title here. And since there's only one title, or there should really only be one title, we shouldn't get multiple values back. So we're going to leave this return array set to off. And then let's just see what happens when we test this step. It should pull in the title of this blog post. All right, and since it's processing 5 items, we got 5 items back, but each post only has one title, which is great. So you can see here, it's taking all of that raw HTML, that messy code, and with this node here, it's able to give us what we want, right? So this is the great social media exodus. And the reason it's giving us Justin Welsh is because I believe, when I go up here, so this is the title of the post. When I go up, and you can see when I put my mouse in the browser in Chrome, we can see the actual title that it's grabbing, which is the great social media exodus. But then you can see we have that little pipe, and then we have Justin Welsh, the name of the website. So that's why it's grabbing that part of the title. All right, so that little pipe was annoying me a little bit, my type A here. So what I did, and I did this off screen just as a test because I thought it would work with a little bit of an SEO background. So what he's using here is the title, right? So the title is what's appearing up here, but this, right, is the H1. Let's see if we inspect this, if it shows us. Yeah, so you can see all I did was I hovered over the title of the newsletter, I right-clicked and hit inspect, and what I can see in this little bit of code, and you don't need to know this, I'm just showing you, is this H1 class, which is the great social media exodus. So he basically has a title, which includes the pipe and his website name, and then he has a separate H1, which is just the title itself without the pipe. So when I change the CSS selector from title to H1, I'm now able to output just the title without the pipe, which is great. So let's keep that as is. All right, now that we've got the title extracted, we need to extract the text of the blog post, right? So let's add a new node here. It's gonna be the same one, by the way. So extract and then extract HTML content. So let's connect that real quick. All right, so what we wanna do here is extract the body of the newsletter, right? So let's come in and we'll rename this here. So let's call it extract body. And now we can leave pretty much all of this the same. Now for the key, we'll call this data. And then for the CSS selector, right? So before we grabbed the H1, now for HTML, for the body of the post, we can just call this body. We want to return the value of text. And down here, it gives us the option if we want to skip over any of these selectors or any part of the content. And so what I'm going to select here or type in is the image in the navigation, right? So I actually don't think, well, he does. So we're going to ignore, is this an image? Yeah. So what this is going to do is ignore this and it's going to ignore anything in the navigation of the code because we don't need that for the output of the body. And so when we test this step, it should give us back a very similar output. The only thing that it's doing is it's going to ignore, again, the navigation. It's going to ignore the body. It's going to ignore any images, but it's going to focus on just the body of the newsletter itself, which is why the output over here looks very similar to the input. It's just stripping out some elements that we don't need, so we have a cleaner set of text to work with. Okay, next we're going to add the actual AI part. Okay, so we have the body, and what we want to do is feed that into AI to summarize it. So let's hit the plus node here. And what I'm going to do is search for this summarization chain. And this is going to use AI to, again, summarize this big chunk of data over here. And now what we need to do is change this setting over here. So the data to summarize, what we want to do is use a document loader. And this is basically going to take this giant HTML and it's going to hand it off to the text splitter, which I'll show you in the next step. But I'm going to leave these as is, these default values. So for data to summarize, make sure you change it to use document loader. And then when you click out of there, you'll see two options that we need to configure here, which are the model and then the document. So for the model is easy enough. You can use any model that you have with n8n. I'm going to just stick with OpenAI. If you haven't configured your account yet, you'll be prompted to enter your OpenAI API key, and then from there you can choose the model. So I'm going to leave ChatGPT or GPT-4o MIDI as the model. All right, so now we've got our model connected. And now you can see under the summarization chain, we're being kind of prompted here for this document. And so how are we going to handle the document? So I'm going to press on the plus button, and I'm going to select this default data loader. So it's going to load all of that data from the HTML, and it's going to pass it off to this text splitter, which will then feed into our AI so it can summarize it in chunks. But you want to choose this default data loader here. And then inside of this node, you do need to make a change here. So for the mode, we don't want to load all the input data. We want to load a specific set or a subset of data. So change this to load specific data. And then what I want you to do is change the data field here to expression. And what do we want to load in? Remember, we want this data that's coming from the extract body node from earlier, right? So this extract body node is taking the body of the newsletter or the text of the newsletter, not the headline. So I want to drag, and I'm in the schema view here, and under extract body for this data node, which I can kind of drag into over here. Okay, so now we've got this JSON.data, and now when I scroll, what I can see is the actual text of the newsletter, right? So this is the data that we want to load in. All right, so you can click out of there, and now you're going to be prompted to add a text splitter, which is basically just going to chunk out this text. If it's a big, giant blob of text, it's going to basically just cut it into smaller pieces for our AI to handle. So click on the text splitter, and then we want to choose this second one, which n8n recommends for most use cases, the recursive character text splitter. And then for the chunk size, you can kind of play with this. I'm going to maybe leave this at 1000. You could bump this up if you want. But again, what this is doing is it's chunking up the text so it can feed into the AI model in case there are any issues with like a context window. That's the purpose of this. n8n is defaulting to 1000. So let's leave that at 1000. And now with that set up, we have got our AI step, right? So we're feeding the text of the newsletter, we're chunking it out, and we're feeding it to AI to analyze. All right, so our AI part is looking pretty good. So let's just add a little sticky note around here. All right, so we've got our scrape newsletter, we've got our summarize AI, our extract title node is kind of hanging out on top. But now that we've got this flow, what we need to do next is merge our title and our body, right, together, because right now these are two different pieces of information. We're going to do a little cleanup, and then we'll write it to Google Sheets. All right, so what I want to do next is add a node here at the end of the AI step, and I want to search for merge, right? So it's going to merge data of multiple streams once data from both is available. And actually, let me click out of it quickly, because right now we have the AI connected, but we don't have the title connected. So we need to do that before we kind of configure this. So let's drag this into input number 2. And actually, no, we need that to be input 1. So let me delete that, right? So the input number 1 actually should be the title. Obviously, title comes first, then the body. So let me delete that connection, and then I'll connect title to input 1, and I'll connect the AI summary. So the AI summary is going to be input 2. Right? And this is going to be important because when we come into the merge node, what we want to do is we want to do combine, and then for combine by, we want to do position. So I can't see it here because it hasn't executed. Let's try to execute these previous nodes so I can kind of illustrate what we're doing here. So you can see in the previous step over here, or the input section, the first available output that we have is the title, and then below that we're going to have the AI summary. So it's asking us to execute the previous nodes, but we know that under the AI summary we're going to have an output, right? So input 1 is going to be the title, which you can see over here, and then input 2 is going to be the AI summary. Let's see if we can execute that to see it. Okay, perfect. So I executed that previous step. So now it's much easier to visualize, especially on the right side of our screen, on what this node is doing. Again, the mode is combine, then we're combining by position, and then we're doing the number of inputs to 2. So this is kind of mapping itself. Instead of us dragging the nodes in manually, it's taking this title, which is position 1, and then also the AI summary text response, which is position 2. And then what we can see on the right is going to be our output eventually, right? So we've got our title, which is coming directly from the newsletter itself. And then we've got this text response, which is the AI summary, all right? So this merge is working great. All right, so let's move on. Now, originally I had kind of this cleanup step. I'm gonna see if we can do without it, because I actually don't, now that I'm looking at this, looking at the output, right? It's pretty clean. We've got the title here. We've got the text. I don't really think there's anything we need to clean up. So let's test this with just going straight from the merge node to Google Sheets. Let me search for Google Sheets. And what we want to do here is append or update a row in a sheet. Now, if you haven't connected your Google account with n8n, do that. It's single sign-on. It just takes a second. So again, this is our spreadsheet, and for the purposes here, let me clear this out so we're working with a blank slate. And what you want to do is, once you're connected to Google Sheets, you're going to want to choose your actual spreadsheet and the table. So let me do that. All right, so you can see I've selected for the document, I have selected the name of the spreadsheet, and then the sheet, there's only one sheet, so it is sheet 1. But the operation is append or update row. The resource is sheet within document. Actually, no, I made one mistake up here. So for this operation, we're not updating anything, right? I had this at append and update. That was my mistake. We're only appending rows or adding a new row. All right, so that's important. Change that. So the operation should be append row. Mapping columns will be manual. And now what we need to do is just drag in the title and summary variables as an expression. Okay, so for title, I'm going to click over to expression, and in the input over here in the schema view, what you want to do is just grab this little title and drag it right into here, and you'll see that populate, right? So you can see the result is the great social media exodus. So we know that's working, okay? Now for the summary, we need to do the same thing. We need to change this to expression, and then in the input over here under response text, okay, this is what we want for the summary, right? The AI summary. So I'm going to grab this little thing that says text and drag this into summary. And now we can see that kind of pre-populate with the very first one. So that's the AI summary, right? So it's turning green. We can see the result, which means it's looking good. All right, I think we're finally ready. So instead of testing this just with the Google Sheets step, let's test this step by step. So we've got our full build out over here. Let me make sure that I save. Now, again, my spreadsheet is empty. And so I'm just going to hit test workflow, and you're going to see everything kind of happen in real time, where it's scraping the content It's sending it to our data loader and then our text splitter to chunk it out. That's going to go into our AI summary, which is using the OpenAI model, right? It's already done all of that scraping. Now it's merging the title and the AI summary, and you can see it's hit our Google Sheet. Now, if we go into our spreadsheet, there we go. And we've got the title without that little pipe. And so we've got our titles over here, and then we've got the AI summary over here, right? So all of our scraped content was summarized with AI, written into our Google Sheet. We grabbed the title directly from the newsletter itself. So I hope this video was helpful. Do me a favor, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment below. All of these things help out the YouTube algorithm. They help out the channel. And again, if you want to get this template and all of my other templates and join a community of AI builders, be sure to join my school community, AI Automations Made Easy. You'll see a link to that below this video. Thanks, guys.